The weight of 45 years in uniform still sits on my shoulders, even now as I record this. You're looking at Colonel William Harrington, 101st Airborne Division, veteran of conflicts that span half a century. Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, Iraq. Places where I've watched good men die and made decisions that haunt my dreams every night. But none of that, absolutely none of it, prepared me for the war I would face when I finally came home. I stood on my front porch in Bridgeport that crisp October morning, 6 months ago, still wearing my dress uniform, 45 years of service, culminating in a retirement ceremony where generals shook my hand and politicians praised my sacrifice. Medals that tell stories of heroism, bravery, and loss adorn my chest. But medals don't keep you warm at night. They don't fill the empty chair at your daughter's graduation. They don't make up for the birthdays missed, the school plays unattended, the father-daughter dances forsaken for duty, honor, country. When I turned the key to enter my own home, a beautiful lakeside property I'd paid for but rarely seen, I felt like an intruder. Family photos lined the hallway, chronicling a life I'd largely missed. Rebecca at 5, gap-toothed and beaming on her first bicycle. Rebecca at 16, stunning in her prom dress, standing beside a father figure substitute, my brother-in-law, who stepped in when I couldn't. Rebecca at 22, accepting her law degree from Boston University, the education I'd silently funded through decades of combat pay and hazard stipends. Martha, my ex-wife, had agreed to host this homecoming dinner. "She needs closure, William," Martha had said during our last phone call. "You both do." Adidi, what I didn't know then was what kind of closure awaited me. I spent that afternoon at the Patriots pub, where men like me, men with 1,000-yard stares and stories they only tell each other, gathered to remember and to forget. Frank Dawson, my oldest friend since basic training in '75, nursed a whiskey across from me. "You ready for this, Bill?" he asked, concern etching deeper lines into his weathered face. "I've survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, Frank. I think I can handle dinner with my daughter," I replied with a confidence I didn't feel. Frank shook his head. "Different kind of battlefield, brother. Different rules of engagement." How right he was. The dinner was set for 7. I arrived at 6:30, military punctuality ingrained in my bones. Martha answered the door, her face softening at the sight of me in full dress uniform. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the young nurse who'd stolen my heart before Vietnam changed me. "You didn't have to wear the uniform, William," she said, helping me with my cap. "It's who I am, Martha," I replied simply. After all these years, what else could I say? The uniform wasn't just clothing. It was my identity, my purpose, the reason for every sacrifice I'd made, including my family. The house smelled of pot roast and apple pie, a homecoming meal straight from the Norman Rockwell America I'd spent my life defending. Martha had set the table with the fine china we'd received as wedding gifts 43 years ago, china that had remained mostly unused, packed away during deployments, moves from base to base, the transient existence of a military family. At precisely 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. My heart rate increased, the same physiological response I'd experienced before combat operations. Prepare for engagement, assess the situation, adapt and overcome. Rebecca entered, a vision in a professional blue dress, every inch the successful attorney she'd become. Behind her stood Richard Bennett, her husband of 5 years, a financial executive with perfect teeth and a handshake that always felt just a little too practiced to me. Something about him raised my tactical awareness from the first time we'd met at their wedding. Perhaps it was the way his eyes calculated rather than observed, or how his questions about my military service always seemed oddly specific. "Dad," Rebecca said, the word sounding foreign on her lips. Not Daddy anymore. Not the name she'd squeal with delight when I'd returned from deployments during her childhood, running into my arms despite Martha's warnings not to wrinkle Daddy's uniform. "Rebecca," I responded, standing at something close to attention. "You look beautiful." Dinner began with strained small talk, Martha carried most of the conversation, updates about neighbors I barely remembered, community changes during my last deployment, the weather patterns of Connecticut versus the deserts I'd grown accustomed to. Richard occasionally interjected with questions about my retirement plans, investments, military connections. Each question seemed innocent enough, but something in his delivery kept my guard up. The breaking point came with dessert. Apple pie, my favorite, Martha remembered. "So, Colonel," Richard began, using my rank rather than Dad or even William, "now that you're finally done with your adventures, I suppose you'll be wanting to involve yourself in Rebecca's life more?" The condescension in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. Adventures, as if 4.5 decades of service, of watching brothers in arms die, of making life or death decisions, could be dismissed as some kind of extended vacation. "I've always been involved in Rebecca's life," I said carefully, measuring my words like ammunition. Every decision I made was with her future in mind. Rebecca's fork clattered against fine china. "Involved? You call being absent for my entire childhood involved?" The sudden shift in temperature was palpable. Martha's eyes darted between us, recognizing the incoming firefight but powerless to call in air support. "Rebecca," I began, "everything I did was for the country, for the mission, for your men, for everyone except your actual family," she interrupted, years of rehearsed resentment flowing freely now. "Do you know how many father-daughter dances I attended with Uncle Robert? How many times I had to explain to friends why my dad missed another birthday, another graduation? I was serving our country," I said, the justification that had gotten me through countless missed milestones suddenly sounding hollow, even to my own ears. "And who was serving us, Dad? Who was serving your family while you were off playing hero?" Richard placed a supportive hand on Rebecca's shoulder, but I caught something else in his expression: satisfaction. As if this confrontation was proceeding exactly according to some predetermined plan. "Becky," Martha intervened, "your father sacrificed—" "Don't tell me about his sacrifices." Rebecca's voice rose, tears forming in her eyes. "What about our sacrifices? What about growing up without a father? What about watching Mom cry herself to sleep, wondering if you were dead or alive when communications went dark?" Each accusation hit with precision, finding vulnerabilities in armor I thought impenetrable. Combat had taught me to withstand physical pain, but nothing had prepared me for this emotional ambush. "I'm here now," I said quietly. "I've retired. We can—" That's when Rebecca delivered the kill shot. "You were never here. We don't need you for anything, you crazy old man." The table fell silent. Martha gasped. Richard suppressed what looked suspiciously like a smile. For 45 years, I'd maintained composure under enemy fire. I'd made split-second decisions that determined whether men lived or died. I'd negotiated with warlords and terrorists. But in that moment, facing my daughter's unfiltered contempt, I found myself tactically unprepared. I stood slowly, straightened my uniform jacket out of habit, and looked at my daughter one last time. The little girl who used to wear my cap around the house was gone, replaced by a stranger whose life had been shaped by my absence rather than my presence. Without a word, I turned and walked out. Military discipline prevented me from slamming the door. Instead, I closed it with quiet finality, got into my car and drove straight to James Peterson's house, my military attorney and perhaps the only true friend I had left. By morning, my decision was made. Rebecca would receive nothing. Not the house at Lakeside Manor, not my military pension, not the investments I'd accumulated through decades of combat pay and careful planning. Nothing, or so everyone thought. What nobody realized was that this apparent act of revenge was actually the first move in a much larger operation, one that would ultimately expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of military command and save my daughter from dangers she couldn't possibly imagine. James Peterson's face registered genuine shock when I told him what happened at dinner. We sat in his study, surrounded by law books and military memorabilia, two old soldiers planning what looked like a vindictive counterattack. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Bill?" James leaned forward in his leather chair, the dim lamp casting shadows that deepened the concern lines on his face. Disinheriting your only child is extreme. I gazed out his window toward the distant silhouette of Fort Hampshire, where both our military careers had intertwined decades ago. She called me a crazy old man, James. I said, the words still burning like shrapnel. Said they never needed me, that I was never there. James sighed, removing his reading glasses. With all due respect, Bill, you weren't. Not physically. His bluntness caught me off guard. James had always been direct. It's why I trusted him with my legal affairs, and more importantly, with the truth. Every deployment, every mission, every godforsaken hellhole I was sent to was for her future, I defended, hearing the hollowness in my own justification. For her safety. She doesn't see it that way, James replied softly. And frankly, as your friend and not your attorney, can you blame her? The question hung in the air between us, a truth I'd avoided confronting throughout my decorated career. What good is protecting your country if you lose your family in the process? I stood and paced across his oriental rug, a gift from a grateful Saudi diplomat after a classified operation in '91. My reflection in the window showed a man trapped between worlds, decorated officer and failed father. Something felt off about that dinner, James. It wasn't just Rebecca's anger. That husband of hers, Richard, something about him doesn't sit right with me. James raised an eyebrow. The investment banker, what about him? His questions were too precise, about my deployments, my clearance level, my connections at the Pentagon. I turned to face James. And did you notice he never calls me Dad or William? Always Colonel, like he's mocking the rank. You think he has an agenda beyond being a supportive spouse to your estranged daughter? I crossed to the bookshelf where James kept photos from our younger days. 2 lieutenants in Vietnam, naive and unbroken. Call it intuition. 45 years in intelligence operations teaches you to spot inconsistencies. That outburst from Rebecca, it felt rehearsed, prompted even. James looked skeptical, but knew better than to dismiss my instincts outright. My hunches had saved our unit more than once in the Mekong Delta. So what exactly do you want me to do, Bill? Besides the will changes. I sat back down, leaning forward. I need you to create a very public paper trail showing that I've cut Rebecca off completely. Make sure it leaks to Richard's circles. I want him to think he's won. Won what, exactly? James looked increasingly concerned. Bill, are you sure this isn't post-retirement paranoia? PTSD can manifest in 3 weeks ago, I interrupted, lowering my voice. I received a classified briefing at the Pentagon before my retirement. A network of corrupt military officials and civilian contractors has been siphoning billions from defense contracts, selling military secrets, and even orchestrating regime changes in developing nations to benefit their corporate interests. They call themselves Eagle's Talon. James went still, his attorney demeanor giving way to the alert posture of a former Special Forces operator. And you think Richard is connected? I've been tracking unusual questions and information leaks for years. Classified details about operations I was involved in would appear in enemy intelligence shortly after I'd mentioned them in calls home. I thought our lines were compromised, but now I let the implication hang in the air. You think Richard married your daughter to monitor you? James looked incredulous. That's a hell of a long game, Bill. These people play long games, James. They think in decades, not news cycles. I pulled out a small notebook from my uniform pocket. Look at the timeline. Richard entered Rebecca's life shortly after I was assigned to the task force investigating missing Stinger missiles in Afghanistan. Their chance meeting at a charity gala. The gala was sponsored by a shell company linked to arms dealers we were investigating. James studied my notes, his expression growing grimmer with each page. Even if you're right, what's your plan? You can't just accuse your son-in-law of being part of an international conspiracy without proof. Rebecca already thinks you're a crazy old man, I finished for him, which is exactly the cover I need. No one suspects the disgraced paranoid veteran of running a counterintelligence operation. I outlined my plan. First, change my will publicly. making it clear Rebecca would receive nothing. Second, leak information about a final consulting mission overseas, bait for Eagle's Talon. Third, stage my own death in an ambush, giving me the freedom to investigate without surveillance. Finally, leave Rebecca evidence that would open her eyes to Richard's true nature. "This is insane," James whispered, but I could see the old tactical mind working behind his eyes. "If you're wrong, you'll destroy any chance of reconciliation with your daughter. And if I'm right, I'll save her life," I countered. "Richard isn't just monitoring me through her. He's been systematically isolating her, controlling her narrative about me, about her childhood. Classic manipulation tactics." I pulled out a flash drive from my pocket. "I've been recording our phone conversations for years, not because I didn't trust Rebecca, but because something felt wrong. Listen to this." I played a series of clips spanning a decade. Rebecca's tone when speaking about me gradually shifted from hurt but loving to bitter and resentful, often using phrases I'd later hear Richard use when speaking about military personnel. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable to trained ears. "Christ," James muttered, "it's like listening to indoctrination in slow motion." "Exactly," I said, stopping the recording. "And here's the most damning part. 2 months ago, I hired a private security firm to do background checks on Richard. His entire history before business school is fabricated. The family he claims to come from in Connecticut. They've never heard of him." James sat back, visibly processing. "You've been investigating your son-in-law for years without telling Rebecca. How could I? Every attempt at warning her was twisted into evidence of my paranoia and inability to accept her happiness. Classic counterintelligence tactics discredit the source." The grandfather clock in James's hallway chimed midnight as we finalized the details. The legal documents would be drawn up showing my complete disinheritance of Rebecca. Meanwhile, the actual assets would be moved to offshore accounts only she could access once she knew the truth. "If this goes sideways, Bill," James began. "It won't," I assured him with more confidence than I felt. "I've survived 3 wars, James. I'll survive this one too." The following week was a carefully choreographed performance. I made a scene at Atlantic Trust Bank, loudly changing my accounts and beneficiaries within earshot of a teller I knew lived in Rebecca's neighborhood. I drunkenly complained about ungrateful children at the Patriots pub, where several veterans with connections to Eagle's Talon operatives would overhear. I even arranged a public argument with Martha at Memorial Veterans Hospital during my checkup. The stage was set. The trap was baited. 7 days after changing my will, I received the call I'd been waiting for. A private military contractor with suspected Eagle's Talon connections offered me a lucrative consulting position for a brief mission in Yemen. The perfect opportunity to fake my death. What I didn't anticipate was Rebecca showing up at my door the night before my scheduled departure. The knock came at 2300 hours. Military time had never left my system. Through the peephole, I saw my daughter standing alone on my porch, looking simultaneously angry and vulnerable in the harsh porch light. For a moment, I hesitated. The operation was in motion. Any deviation risked everything, but this was my daughter, the reason for every sacrifice, every mission, every moment away. I opened the door. "What are you doing here, Rebecca?" I kept my voice cold, playing the role of the bitter father. She looked smaller somehow, less certain than at dinner. "Richard's out of town on business. I wanted to talk to you. Alone." Warning bells immediately rang in my mind. Richard never left Rebecca alone, especially not since our confrontation. His business trips always mysteriously coincided with any opportunity for Rebecca and me to speak privately. "Come in," I said, scanning the street behind her for surveillance. Nothing obvious, but Eagle's Talon operatives were professionals. My living room was sparse, a soldier's quarters, not a home. Rebecca perched awkwardly on the edge of my couch, looking at the military photos and memorabilia that constituted my only decoration. "Is it true?" she asked abruptly. "That you've cut me out completely?" I maintained my cover, despite every paternal instinct screaming to tell her everything. You made your feelings quite clear at dinner. You don't need me for anything. Why should you need my money? She flinched as her own words were thrown back at her. I don't care about the money, Dad. I never did, but this feels so final. I turned away, ostensibly to pour myself a drink, but actually to hide the emotion threatening to break through my tactical facade. Isn't that what you wanted? Finality? Closure? I wanted my father, she said quietly. All those years, that's all I ever wanted. The simplicity of her statement nearly broke my resolve. I had to remind myself this could be exactly what Richard wanted, to use my emotional vulnerability to extract information about my upcoming mission. You have a funny way of showing it, I replied, harsher than intended, calling me a crazy old man, saying I was never there. You weren't, she countered, a flash of the dinner anger returning. Do you know what it's like growing up with a ghost? A father who exists only in stories and occasional phone calls? I sat across from her, maintaining critical distance. Everything I did was to protect you, to secure your future. That's what Richard says you'd say, she responded almost automatically, that you'd justify your absence with patriotism and duty. There it was, confirmation that Richard had been coaching her responses, preparing her for exactly this conversation. I felt simultaneously validated in my suspicions and heartbroken that my relationship with my daughter had been so thoroughly manipulated. And what does Richard say about my changing the will? I probed, watching her reaction carefully. A momentary confusion crossed her face. He doesn't know yet. I haven't told him. That was unexpected. If Richard was Eagle's Talon, he should have known immediately through his network. Unless, why not tell him? I pressed. Rebecca looked down at her hands. He's been different lately, tense, secretive, ever since your retirement ceremony, actually. He keeps taking calls in other rooms, working late. I thought perhaps coming here, talking to you directly. My tactical mind raced. Either this was an elaborate performance designed to lower my guard, or Richard was indeed becoming unstable as the Eagle's Talon operation entered a critical phase. Either way, I needed to proceed with extreme caution. My retirement has been difficult, I offered, providing a plausible alternative explanation. Adjusting to civilian life, facing the family I neglected. Perhaps I overreacted with the will. A hope flickered across Rebecca's face that twisted my heart. So you'll reconsider? Let me think about it, I said, non-committal. I'm leaving for a consulting job tomorrow. When I return, perhaps we can discuss it further. Consulting? At your age? The skepticism in her voice sounded genuine. Where? Just some advisory work for former colleagues. I deflected. Nothing dangerous. Rebecca stood, clearly unsatisfied, but sensing she'd get nothing more from me tonight. At the door she paused, looking back at the stranger who was her father. Despite everything, she said softly, I do love you, Dad. I just don't know how to love someone who was never really there. After she left, I spent the night reviewing surveillance footage from the microcameras I'd installed around my property. Rebecca had indeed come alone. No sign of Richard or his associates. But as I watched her drive away, a black sedan pulled out from 3 houses down, following her at a discreet distance. The game was in motion. The next day, I would leave for Yemen. 3 days later, news of my death in an ambush would reach Bridgeport. And then the real operation would begin, uncovering the full extent of Eagle's Talon's reach and saving my daughter from a man who had never loved her, only used her to get to me. As dawn broke over Lakeside Manor, I packed a small go bag with essentials. No uniform this time. Where I was going, I needed to be a ghost, invisible, untraceable, dead to the world, but very much alive in my mission. The irony wasn't lost on me. For decades, I'd been physically absent but emotionally present in my love for Rebecca. Now, to save her, I would be physically present in her life, but officially dead. One last mission, one final sacrifice. But this time, the mission was personal. This time, I wasn't fighting for country or flag or even duty. This time, I was fighting for my daughter. The morning after my departure for Yemen, I settled into a small safe house in the industrial district of Bridgeport. The apartment was sparse, a far cry from my quarters at Lakeside Manor, but luxury wasn't the objective. Invisibility was. From this nondescript building, I began the most important intelligence operation of my career. No backup, no official sanction, just an old soldier with a suspicion and a daughter to save. Frank Dawson was the only other person besides James who knew I was still alive. As my former reconnaissance sergeant and closest friend, he'd secured this location through channels that couldn't be traced to either of us. "Place isn't much," Frank said, dropping a duffel bag of surveillance equipment on the worn linoleum floor. "But it'll keep you off the radar." I surveyed the dingy one-bedroom with its yellowing wallpaper and ancient radiator. "I've slept in worse." "Mekong Delta, 78, Frank snorted. "At least here the rats don't carry dengue fever." We spent that first day setting up the equipment: directional microphones, remote cameras, signal interceptors. By nightfall, I had a modest command center established in what should have been the dining room. Multiple monitors displayed feeds from cameras strategically placed near Rebecca's home, Richard's office, and other locations of interest. "You sure about this, Bill?" Frank asked as he prepared to leave. The concern in his eyes wasn't just for the operation. "This isn't like our military ops. This is your family." I nodded, already scanning the first intercepted communications from Richard's private cell phone. "That's precisely why failure isn't an option, Frank." After he left, I settled into the familiar rhythm of surveillance. Military intelligence had taught me patience, the willingness to watch and wait for patterns to emerge, for targets to reveal themselves through routine and habit. For 3 days, I observed Richard's movements. His daily routine appeared normal on the surface: breakfast with Rebecca, commute to his financial firm downtown, lunch at the same upscale restaurant home by 7, but there were anomalies. A 20-minute detour every Tuesday to a storage facility registered to a shell company. Brief meetings with men whose faces matched those in classified Eagle's Talon files. Phone calls made from public locations rather than his office or home. On the 4th day, everything changed. James Peterson executed the next phase of our plan. News of my death reached Bridgeport. I watched Rebecca's reaction through the camera positioned across from their home. She collapsed when the military officers delivered the news, genuinely devastated. Richard comforted her publicly, the perfect image of a supportive husband. But when she left the room, his demeanor shifted instantly. He made a call, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "It's confirmed. Harrington is dead. Yemen operation successful." My blood ran cold. Confirmation that Richard wasn't just connected to Eagle's Talon, he was actively involved in orchestrating my assassination. The mission in Yemen had been a setup from the beginning, designed to eliminate me permanently. That night, while Rebecca slept sedated by grief, Richard slipped out to meet someone at the Reserve, an exclusive club frequented by Bridgeport's elite. I'd anticipated this move and had Frank positioned nearby with a directional microphone. The meeting was with Robert Wilson, not just a congressman as the public knew him, but apparently a high-ranking member of Eagle's Talon. "Harrington's elimination creates an opportunity," Wilson said between sips of expensive bourbon. "His intelligence contacts, his access codes, his knowledge of our Middle East operations, all of it dies with him." Richard nodded, swirling his untouched scotch. "What about the daughter? She might have information she doesn't even realize is valuable." The casual way he referenced Rebecca, not as his wife, but as an asset to be exploited, confirmed my worst fears. Wilson's response chilled me further. "Extract whatever you can, then terminate the relationship. We can't risk loose ends, especially with the Nexus operation entering its final phase." "Nexus?" Richard questioned. "I wasn't briefed on that." Wilson leaned closer, his voice dropping below what even our advanced equipment could clearly capture. "Highest level, presidential succession, 3 months. The fragments we caught were enough to elevate this from a personal vendetta to a matter of national security. Eagle's Talon wasn't just a corrupt military contractor network. They were planning something that involved presidential succession. An assassination, a coup." I couldn't be certain, but the timeline matched the upcoming election. I spent the next 48 hours in constant surveillance mode, surviving on military-grade caffeine tablets and combat rations from my go bag. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, not with Rebecca's life and possibly national security at stake. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While monitoring Rebecca's movements, I noticed her visiting doctor, Michael Thompson at the VA Medical Center, my former therapist during my brief treatment for PTSD after Afghanistan. Through the hospital's surprisingly vulnerable security cameras, I watched their conversation unfold in his office. "I found these in my father's study," Rebecca said, placing a folder on Thompson's desk. "After the officers told me about Yemen, I went to his house to, I don't know, feel close to him somehow. These were hidden in a false bottom drawer." Sir Thompson opened the folder cautiously. "Have you shown these to anyone else? Your husband?" Rebecca shook her head. "Something told me not to. Dad always said you were the only doctor he ever trusted." My heart swelled with unexpected pride. Even through years of Richard's manipulation, some part of Rebecca still trusted my judgment. Thompson examined the documents, his expression growing increasingly grave. "These are surveillance reports on your husband. Financial transactions through Cayman Island accounts, communications with known arms dealers. Rebecca, your father was investigating Richard." "That's impossible," she protested, but without conviction. "Richard is an investment banker. He manages portfolios for clients, not whatever this suggests." Thompson met her eyes directly. "Your father wasn't a paranoid old man, Rebecca. He was one of the most decorated intelligence officers in his generation. If he was tracking Richard, he had reasons." I watched a subtle shift in my daughter's posture, the same straightening of the spine I'd seen in young recruits when they finally understood the gravity of their situation. Military bearing was in her blood, whether she recognized it or not. "What should I do?" she asked, suddenly looking very much like the little girl who used to ask me how to handle playground bullies. "Trust no one," Thompson advised, "not even me. Take these home, hide them somewhere new, act completely normal around Richard. And Rebecca, your father left this for you just in case." He handed her a small key. "For a safety deposit box at Atlantic Trust," he explained. "Box 4577. He set it up last year with instructions to give you the key if anything happened to him." The safety deposit box was another piece of our contingency plan, containing the flash drive with everything I'd compiled on Eagle's Talon, including recordings of Richard's manipulation over the years. I needed to move quickly now. Rebecca was awakening to the truth, which put her in immediate danger. If Richard suspected she knew anything, the termination Wilson had mentioned might come sooner rather than later. I called James on our secure line. "We need to accelerate the timeline," I told him without preamble. "Rebecca visited Thompson. She has the key." "That wasn't supposed to happen for another week," James replied, concern evident. "We haven't confirmed all the Eagle's Talon members yet." "We don't have a week," I countered. "I need to make contact with Rebecca before she confronts Richard or does something that exposes her knowledge." We arranged for Rebecca to receive an anonymous note directing her to Eagle Hill Cemetery at dusk, a location I could secure easily and monitor for surveillance. The note was deliberately cryptic. "Your father's final mission isn't complete. Box 4577 is just the beginning." I watched through binoculars from a caretaker's shed as Rebecca arrived at the cemetery that evening. She came alone, having told Richard she was visiting my grave. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 30 minutes, she waited by the military headstones, tension evident in every line of her body. Finally, as dusk deepened into darkness, I approached from behind the memorial obelisk, keeping to the shadows. "Rebecca," I called softly. She spun around, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. In the dim light, I must have looked like a ghost. Appropriate, given the circumstances. "Dad?" she whispered, disbelief and hope warring in her voice. "How? They said you were killed." "That's what they were supposed to say," I replied, stepping closer, but still maintaining tactical distance. I need you to listen carefully. We don't have much time." The shock on her face transformed rapidly through confusion, anger, and finally a guarded alertness that reminded me painfully of myself. "You faked your death?" Her voice hardened. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? I've been grieving for 4 days. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "But your life depends on believing that story a little longer. Richard is not who you think he is." Her expression shifted subtly. "The files in your study, the safety deposit box key, this was all planned." I nodded. "Did you open the box yet?" "This morning. There was a flash drive." Her voice trembled slightly. "Videos of Richard meeting with people, audio recordings of our phone calls, data showing our chance meeting was orchestrated. Is it true? Has our entire marriage been a lie?" The devastation in her voice cut deeper than any battlefield injury I'd ever sustained. This was the cost of my absence, leaving her vulnerable to predators like Richard, who recognized her need for stability, for connection, and exploited it mercilessly. "Not everything was a lie," I said carefully, "but his purpose in your life was compromised." "Compromised," she repeated bitterly. "Such a clinical military term for discovering your husband married you to spy on your father." A twig snapped somewhere to our left. Instantly, I pulled Rebecca behind the large memorial stone, my combat reflexes engaging before conscious thought. "We're exposed here," I whispered. "We need to move. My car is behind the maintenance building. Can you trust me enough to come with me, just for tonight?" The question hung between us, weighted with decades of absence, of missed opportunities, of a relationship built more on duty than presence. Rebecca studied my face in the gathering darkness. "All those years, were you really protecting me, or was the mission always more important?" It was the question that had haunted my career, my marriage, my life, the impossible balance of duty to country versus duty to family. "Both," I answered honestly. "I thought I could protect you best by ensuring the world you lived in remained safe. I was wrong. I should have been there." Another sound, deliberate footsteps now, moving through the cemetery rows. "Richard?" she breathed. I shook my head. "His people, he wouldn't come himself." Fear flickered across her face, but behind it was something I recognized from the battlefield. Determination, survival instinct. "Okay," she whispered. "I'm with you." Udja, we moved through the headstones, using tactical pathways I'd mapped earlier, staying low and using the terrain for cover. Despite never having military training, Rebecca followed my silent hand signals instinctively, mirroring my movements with a natural grace that spoke to our shared DNA. At the maintenance building, I ushered her into a nondescript sedan with tinted windows. "Where are we going?" she asked as I pulled away, driving without headlights until we reached the cemetery gates. "Somewhere Richard and Eagle's Talon can't find us," I replied, checking the mirrors for tails. "Somewhere we can plan our next move." Eagle's Talon? The organization Richard works for. Military contractors, corrupt officials, financial operatives, all working together to manipulate global politics for profit. And now they're planning something they call Nexus, involving presidential succession. Rebecca absorbed this, her legal mind connecting dots I could see working behind her eyes. "So the inheritance thing, changing your will, that was all part of this plan?" I nodded, turning onto the highway with a careful merge. I needed to appear defeated, bitter, a disgraced old soldier with no credibility. It gave me freedom to investigate while they thought they'd neutralized me. "Before they actually tried to neutralize you in Yemen," she added grimly. "Exactly." We drove in silence for several miles, the weight of revelation settling between us. Finally, Rebecca spoke again, her voice smaller than before. "All those things I said at dinner, about you, never being there, being a crazy old man." She paused. "Richard had been saying those exact phrases for years, planting them. I see that now." "It wasn't your fault," I said, reaching across the darkness to briefly touch her hand. "Psychological manipulation is what these people excel at. They identified your vulnerabilities, your legitimate hurt over my absences, and exploited them." "But some of it was true," she insisted. You weren't there, whatever your reasons. I couldn't deny it. No, I wasn't. And I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to make that right. But first, we need to stop Eagle's Talon and make sure you're safe. As we approached the safe house, I noticed Rebecca studying my profile in the dim dashboard light. You know, she said with unexpected gentleness, when I was little, I used to imagine you were secretly a superhero. That your deployments weren't just military missions, but secret world-saving operations that only you could handle. The childish fantasy pierced my heart. I was just a soldier, Rebecca, doing my duty as best I could. She nodded, looking out at the darkened city passing by. And now? What are you now, Dad? I considered the question as we pulled into the alley behind the safe house, killing the engine. Outside, the night was quiet except for distant sirens, a city oblivious to the conspiracy taking root within it. Now, I said, meeting my daughter's eyes across the darkness, I'm just a father, and this time, the mission and my duty to you are exactly the same thing. The safe house felt different with Rebecca inside it. What had been merely a tactical position, a place to observe and gather intelligence, suddenly became something closer to a home. My daughter sat at the makeshift command center, studying the surveillance monitors with an intensity that reminded me painfully of myself. All this time, she murmured, scanning the evidence I'd collected over months. You were watching, planning. I brewed us both coffee in the tiny kitchenette, military style, strong enough to dissolve the spoon. Old habits, intelligence gathering was my specialty in the later years, less field work, more analysis. Rebecca accepted the chipped mug I offered, wrapping her fingers around it like she used to hold hot chocolate as a child. These monitors, you can see our house from here? And Richard's office, his regular meeting spots, the storage facility he visits on Tuesdays. I pulled up the relevant feeds on the main screen. 3 days ago, after news of my death reached him, he accessed a secure room inside that facility, spent 47 minutes there. What's in it? That's what we need to find out. I tapped a folder on the desk. According to financial records, the facility is leased to Brunswick Consulting, a shell company that traces back to a holding group connected to Eagle's Talon. Whatever's in that room is important enough that Richard only accesses it when he believes it's absolutely secure. Rebecca studied the grainy footage of Richard entering the storage facility, his familiar face suddenly strange to her. How do we get in? We don't, I replied. Too risky, but tomorrow is Tuesday, his regular visit day. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You want to follow him. Not me. I'm supposedly dead, and they'll be watching for any sign I survived Yemen, but they don't suspect you know anything yet. I let the implication hang. Rebecca set down her coffee, conflict evident on her face. You want me to spy on my husband, the man I've shared a bed with for 5 years? The hurt in her voice made me wince. However justified our mission, I was asking my daughter to confront the complete destruction of her marriage, her trust, her sense of reality. I know it's asking a lot, I acknowledged, but we need to know what's in that room. The Nexus operation they mentioned involves presidential succession. That suggests something at the highest levels of government, possibly an assassination attempt or coup. Rebecca's legal mind engaged, pushing past personal pain to analyze the situation objectively. Even if I follow him, how would I get inside? I assume it requires security clearance. It does, I confirmed, pulling out another folder. Biometric lock, specifically fingerprint and retinal scan. But James Peterson secured these from a contact at the security company that installed the system. I handed her technical schematics and an override device disguised as a smartphone. This will create a 3-minute bypass window if placed within 6 inches of the control panel. Once inside, you'll need to document everything you can, photos, documents, anything that gives us insight into Nexus. Rebecca examined the device with growing apprehension. And if I'm caught? The question hung in the air between us, the unbearable possibility I'd been forcing myself not to consider. If Eagle's Talon discovered Rebecca was investigating them, Wilson's casual order to terminate the relationship would take on its deadliest meaning. I'll have eyes on you the entire time, I promised. Frank will be positioned as a delivery driver across the street. I'll be monitoring from here. At the first sign of trouble, we extract you immediately. It wasn't enough. We both knew it. In my military career, I'd sent men and women into dangerous situations with similar assurances. Some never returned, but this wasn't a soldier under my command. This was my daughter. "I need some air," Rebecca said suddenly, standing and moving toward the small balcony that overlooked an alleyway. I gave her space, recognizing the need to process the impossible situation she found herself in. Through the window, I watched her silhouette against the city lights. Her posture, straight-backed despite everything, spoke of a resilience I'd always hoped she had, but never witnessed firsthand. Another casualty of my absence, I'd missed seeing her develop into the formidable woman who now stood contemplating infiltrating a terrorist cell's headquarters. When she returned inside 20 minutes later, her expression had hardened into resolve. "I'll do it," she said simply, "not for you, not even for us, but because if this Nexus operation involves presidential succession, innocent people could die." Pride swelled in my chest. Pride I'd done nothing to earn, but felt powerfully nonetheless. "We'll prepare tonight, review the approach, extraction routes, emergency protocols." We spent hours in tactical planning, my military expertise blending with her quick analytical mind. By midnight, I taught her basic surveillance detection techniques, how to use the specialized camera in her watch, and 3 separate exit strategies from the storage facility. "Get some sleep," I finally advised, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "You need to be sharp tomorrow." Rebecca hesitated, glancing at the small bedroom. "Where will you sleep?" "I'll take the chair," I said, gesturing to the worn recliner beside the monitors. "Need to keep watch anyway." She nodded and moved toward the bedroom, pausing at the threshold. "What happens after tomorrow? After we get whatever information is in that room?" It was the question I'd been avoiding, the long-term implications of our situation. Rebecca's life as she knew it was already destroyed. Her husband was a foreign operative, her father had faked his death, and we were about to steal classified information from a shadow organization with apparent reach into the highest levels of government. "One step at a time," I said, offering what little comfort military pragmatism could provide. "Secure the intelligence first, then we assess." She seemed to accept this, disappearing into the darkened bedroom. I settled into the recliner, eyes fixed on the monitors, mind racing through contingencies and worst-case scenarios. Despite decades of operations planning, nothing had prepared me for directing my own daughter into danger. I must have dozed briefly because I startled awake at the sound of movement. Rebecca stood in the kitchen area, a glass of water in hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You talked in your sleep," she said quietly, called out names, places. I straightened, immediately alert. "Occupational hazard. Sorry if I disturbed you." "You called for Mum and me." She set down her glass. "You sounded afraid." The observation hung between us, unexpectedly intimate. In all our preparations for tomorrow's operation, we'd maintained a professional distance, commander and operative rather than father and daughter. This glimpse of vulnerability threatened that careful separation. "Afghanistan, 2008, I found myself saying. "Communications went dark for 3 weeks during a critical operation. No way to call home to let you and your mother know I was alive. I knew Martha would assume the worst, that you both would. I had nightmares about returning to an empty house, finding you both had given up and moved on without me." Rebecca leaned against the counter, considering this. "Mom used to sit by the phone every night during blackout periods. She'd say, 'He always finds a way to call.' Always. Even after the divorce, she'd check the answering machine when you were deployed." The revelation struck me with unexpected force. After 30 years of marriage, Martha had left during my 3rd Afghanistan tour, a separation I'd accepted as inevitable, the final cost of my divided loyalties. I'd never imagined her waiting by phones for calls that couldn't come. "I didn't know," I said simply. "There's a lot we didn't know about each other." Rebecca's gaze held mine across the darkened room. Maybe that's what Richard exploited, all the spaces between us, the gaps in understanding. It was a perceptive assessment. Eagle's Talon hadn't just identified my daughter as leverage against me, they'd recognized the fracture lines in our family and wedged themselves precisely into those cracks. Get some more sleep, I advised, unwilling to pursue this line of thought further. Tomorrow will require your complete focus. Morning arrived with grey drizzle, ideal conditions for surveillance. Low visibility would help mask Rebecca's approach to the storage facility while providing legitimate reason for the umbrella that would shield her face from security cameras. I watched her prepare with military precision. Dark, nondescript clothing under a raincoat, hair tucked into a cap, the specialized camera watch synchronized to our systems. She'd absorbed yesterday's training with remarkable efficiency, moving with a natural tradecraft that suggested she'd inherited more than just my stubborn chin. Richard leaves for the facility at approximately 13:40 hours each Tuesday, I reminded her, checking the time. You'll need to be in position by 13:30. Rebecca nodded, securing the override device in her inner pocket. And if he deviates from his routine, Frank will alert us. He's already in position, monitoring Richard's office building. I handed her a secure earpiece, virtually invisible once in place. Constant communication. If I say abort, you walk away immediately. No questions, no hesitation. Understood. She inserted the earpiece, testing it with a soft count. 1, 2, 3. Clear transmission, I confirmed, hearing her voice both directly and through my headset. Remember, this is reconnaissance only. Document everything, touch nothing. The moment of departure arrived too quickly. At the door, Rebecca paused, an unasked question in her eyes. I'll be with you every step, I promised, knowing it wasn't enough, knowing nothing could adequately address the danger I was sending her into. She nodded once, squared her shoulders in that military posture that echoed my own, and left. The next 2 hours were among the longest of my life. I tracked Rebecca's movement through the city via the GPS in her watch, maintaining radio silence except for essential communications. At 13:22 hours, she confirmed arrival at her observation post, a cafe across from the storage facility with clear sightlines to the entrance. At 13:37, Frank's voice came through our secure channel. Target is mobile, leaving office building now. Confirmed, I responded, watching the GPS tracker that showed Richard's car moving through downtown traffic toward the storage facility. Rebecca, target approaching your position. ETA 4 minutes. Copy, came her calm reply. I switched to the cafe's security camera feed, which we'd hacked into that morning. Rebecca sat at a window table, ostensibly reading a newspaper, a perfect picture of urban anonymity. No one would connect this composed woman with the grieving daughter of a recently deceased colonel. At 13:42, Richard's black Audi pulled into the storage facility's private lot. Through the camera feed, I saw Rebecca tense slightly, then deliberately relax her shoulders, applying the stress management techniques I'd taught her. Target has entered the building, I narrated, tracking Richard through the facility's external cameras. Northeast entrance, moving toward the elevator. Rebecca folded her newspaper, left payment on the table, and exited the cafe. Her movements were unhurried but purposeful, matching the pace of other pedestrians. Crossing the street now, she murmured, barely moving her lips. Any security personnel visible? I scanned the feeds. One guard at the main entrance, standard private security, not Eagle's Talon. Richard is already on the 3rd floor, moving toward the restricted section. Rebecca approached the building's side entrance, a service door used by maintenance personnel that we'd identified as the least monitored access point. The override device would grant her entry, bypassing the standard security protocols. I'm at the door, she reported, initiating override. I held my breath as she placed the device against the electronic lock. One mistake, one security protocol we hadn't accounted for, and alarms would trigger throughout the facility. 3 seconds passed. 5, 10. I'm in. came her whispered confirmation. Relief flooded through me, immediately replaced by renewed tension. Getting in was only the first hurdle. "Third floor, section C," I directed. "The service stairs should be to your immediate left." I tracked her progress through the building's floor plan, overlaid with the limited camera feeds we could access. The critical area, Richard's secure room, was in a surveillance dead zone, deliberately shielded from any recording devices. Once Rebecca entered that section, we would be blind. "Second floor clear," she reported, proceeding to third. "Be advised, security guard is making rounds on third floor, east corridor," Frank cut in. "Heading away from your position, but maintain caution." Rebecca paused at the third floor landing, waiting for the guard to complete his patrol. I checked Richard's position through his phone's GPS, still in the secure room, as expected. "Guard has entered stairwell at opposite end," I confirmed. "You have approximately 3 minutes before he completes his circuit." Rebecca moved with careful efficiency through the corridor, following the path we'd memorized from the building schematics. Approaching section C, heavy security door, visible at end of hallway. "That's it," I confirmed. "The override should work on the outer door, but the inner room will require Richard's biometrics. You'll need to wait until he exits." She positioned herself in a maintenance alcove with sightlines to the secure door, effectively invisible to casual observation. For the next 27 minutes, she remained motionless, exhibiting the patience of a seasoned operative. Finally, movement. "Target is exiting the secure room," I reported, watching Richard's GPS signature shift. "Prepare to move." The moment Richard cleared the outer security door, Rebecca slipped from her hiding place and caught the heavy door just before it closed completely. A maneuver we'd practiced in the safe house using a simulated door frame. "I'm in the outer chamber," she whispered. "Inner door requires handprint and retinal scan. Place the override directly on the scanner," I instructed. "You'll have 3 minutes once the bypass engages." Udush. Through her earpiece, I heard the soft beep of the security system disengaging, then the hydraulic hiss of the inner door opening. "I'm inside," Rebecca breathed. My God! What do you see?" I prompted, tension coiling in my stomach. "Rebecca, report. Maps, photographs, timeline charts." Her voice had taken on a quality I recognized from battlefield reports, the controlled shock of someone confronting something far worse than anticipated. "Dad, this isn't just about government contracts or even presidential succession. This is a full coup plan." I heard the soft click of her watch camera capturing images. "Details, Rebecca. What specifically are you seeing?" "Assassination targets, multiple officials, the president, vice president, key cabinet members." Her breathing had accelerated slightly. "There are contingency plans for martial law implementation, something called Operation Clean Slate, scheduled for November 4th, Election Day." The implications were staggering. Not just a targeted assassination, but a coordinated attack on the entire chain of command, timed to coincide with the electoral process. The resulting chaos would create the perfect conditions for military intervention, led undoubtedly by Eagle's talons planted officials. "Document everything," I urged. "Focus on operational details, command structures, timetables." For the next 2 minutes, I listened to Rebecca's measured breathing as she systematically photographed the room's contents. The soft click of the camera punctuated her occasional whispered observations about troop deployments, communications disruption plans, and lists of military units deemed reliable for the operation. 1 minute remaining, I warned as the override device approached its time limit. "Prepare to extract." "Almost done," she replied. "Just need to—" Her voice cut off abruptly. "Rebecca?" Alarm shot through me. "Rebecca, report status." Silence. I frantically checked the building's security feeds, but the cameras near Section C showed nothing unusual. Richard's GPS placed him already back at his office downtown. No security alerts had triggered in the building's systems. "Frank, do you have eyes on the facility?" I demanded. "Negative," came his tense reply. "No unusual activity visible from my position." 15 seconds of silence stretched into 30. the longest half-minute of my life. Then finally, "I'm clear," Rebecca's voice returned, slightly breathless. "Had to hide." Maintenance worker entered the outer chamber unexpectedly. Relief washed through me so powerfully I nearly missed her next words. "Dad, I found something else. Something not in the main plans." Her voice had dropped even lower. "A separate file labeled Hampshire Protocol. It has your name on it. Fort Hampshire, my old post. The base where I'd spent most of my later career, where I still had contacts and influence among the senior staff. What does it say?" "It's a contingency plan, in case you weren't actually killed in Yemen. They suspected you might have evidence against them." Her voice tightened. "Dad, they have a list of everyone you might contact for help. James, Frank, Dr. Thompson, Martha, even Mom's sister in Colorado. They're planning to eliminate everyone close to you to flush you out." The cold, tactical part of my mind, the part that had survived 3 wars and countless operations, noted the strategic logic. Eagle's Talon was thorough, methodical. Of course they would have backup plans for my survival. The father in me, however, felt only raw terror. Not for myself, but for everyone I cared about now being targeted because of me. "Get out now," I ordered. "Immediate extraction. We need to warn the others." I've faced enemy fire across 3 continents, but nothing compares to the helplessness of watching your child in danger through a grainy monitor. Rebecca's extraction from the storage facility unfolded with excruciating slowness. Every second a lifetime, as she navigated back through the building, avoiding security personnel with a natural instinct that would have impressed my old special operations team. "East stairwell clear," I directed, monitoring the security feeds. "Exit through the loading dock. Frank is positioned with the extraction vehicle." "Copy," came her terse reply. 23 minutes later, Rebecca and Frank arrived at the safe house. She burst through the door, rain-soaked and pale but otherwise unharmed. The moment the locks engaged behind them, she collapsed into the nearest chair, adrenaline crash hitting her hard. "The files," she managed, removing the specialized watch with trembling fingers. "It's worse than we thought." Frank secured the perimeter while I connected the watch to our system. The images Rebecca had captured flooded the monitors, detailed operational plans, personnel lists, target photographs and timeline charts. Seeing them displayed in their entirety confirmed my worst fears. Eagle's Talon wasn't merely corrupt contractors or disgruntled officers. This was a sophisticated paramilitary organization with deep infiltration into our government and military infrastructure. Operation Clean Slate represented nothing less than a complete decapitation strike against legitimate authority, timed to the moment of greatest democratic vulnerability, a presidential election. 3 simultaneous assassination teams, I noted, studying the tactical diagrams. Primary targets include both presidential candidates, the current administration, and key congressional leadership. Frank whistled low. "Jesus, Bill, this is beyond anything we anticipated." "They're creating a leadership vacuum," Rebecca added, her attorney's mind grasping the constitutional implications. With both candidates eliminated and the sitting administration compromised, emergency powers would activate. Given the election chaos, they could justify martial law implementation. And guess who controls the units designated for domestic security operations? I pointed to a personnel list. General Davidson, Admiral Murray, Colonel Westfield, all names connected to Eagle's Talon in our earlier intelligence. The scope was breathtaking in its ambition and its probability of success. With decades of careful positioning, Eagle's Talon had placed loyalists throughout the chain of command, ready to assume control when the legitimate leadership was eliminated. But the Hampshire Protocol presented a more immediate concern. I pulled up the file Rebecca had photographed, stomach tightening, as I read the detailed surveillance reports on everyone connected to me. Martha's daily routines at her nursing job, James Peterson's home security vulnerabilities, Frank's regular appointments at the VA Medical Center, even Rebecca's jogging route through Lakeside Park. They've been watching all of us, Frank muttered, face darkening as he recognized his own schedule documented with military precision. Contingency activated 48 hours after Yemen operation, I read aloud. If Harrington remains unaccounted for, initiate simultaneous elimination of all primary contacts. Rebecca's face drained of remaining color. That's tomorrow. If they're following this timeline, everyone on this list will be targeted tomorrow. The weight of responsibility crashed down on me with physical force. Every person I cared about, endangered because of their connection to me. Because I'd spent a career making enemies of people who valued power over country. We need to warn them, Rebecca insisted. Get them to safety. Not by phone, Frank cautioned. If they've had us under surveillance this long, all communications will be compromised. I nodded, military planning mode, engaging automatically. We'll need to extract them personally. 3 teams, simultaneous operations. 3 teams? Rebecca questioned. There's only the 3 of us. Dr. Thompson, I explained. He's former military intelligence, still has clearance and contacts. We'll need his help to secure a safe house large enough for everyone. Within the hour, we had an operational plan. Frank would extract Martha from her nursing shift at Memorial Veterans Hospital. I would secure James Peterson from the courthouse where he was trying a case. Rebecca, accompanied by Dr. Thompson, would retrieve necessary supplies and documents from our various residences. Rendezvous at the Thompson Lake House by 2200 hours, I confirmed, checking my watch. Full communications blackout during transit. If any team fails to arrive by 2300, the others proceed to the secondary location. As we prepared to separate, Rebecca paused, studying the wall of evidence we'd accumulated. We still don't know the full extent of Richard's involvement, she said quietly. Is he just a handler assigned to monitor you through me, or is he more central to the operation? It was the question I'd been avoiding. The full measure of her husband's betrayal. The answer lay somewhere in the thousands of documents and surveillance photos covering our investigation board. We'll assess all the evidence once everyone's secure, I promised, unwilling to deepen her pain before the critical extraction operations. But Rebecca had inherited my stubborn persistence. She moved to the section of our intelligence focused specifically on Richard Bennett, scanning the surveillance photos and financial records with an attorney's analytical precision. These offshore transfers, she noted, pointing to a series of transactions. They align with Key Eagle's Talon operations. Richard wasn't just monitoring you, Dad. He was financing their operations. Or she traced a timeline we'd constructed, connecting dates with clinical detachment, despite the personal devastation each revelation must have caused. Our wedding was 3 weeks after you were assigned to the Yemen investigation. My promotion at the law firm, the one Richard helped me get, came exactly when you were granted higher security clearance. Her voice remained steady, but I recognized the controlled fury beneath it, the same cold anger I'd felt in combat when betrayal cost men their lives. His entire career is a fabrication, she continued, pulling photos from the board. The Harvard MBA, the Connecticut childhood, all of it constructed to position him close to me. To you. I placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tension vibrating through her. Rebecca. No, she interrupted, shrugging off my touch. I need to understand exactly what he is, what I've been living with for 5 years. She reached for a file I'd deliberately kept separate from the main investigation, intelligence too devastating to share until absolutely necessary. But before I could intervene, she'd opened it, revealing the final piece of Richard's identity puzzle. Alexei Vostov, she read, staring at the Russian intelligence dossier. Born St. Petersburg, 1979. Recruited to Foreign Intelligence Services at 19. Her voice faltered for the first time. Specialized training in deep cover operations and psychological manipulation. The photograph showed a younger Richard, or rather, Alexei, in Russian military uniform standing alongside known intelligence operatives. The man who had wooed my daughter, married her, shared her bed for 5 years, had never existed. Eagle's Talon isn't just a domestic conspiracy, I explained gently. It's an international operation with connections to several foreign intelligence services. Richard, Alexei, is their direct link to Russian backing. Rebecca set down the file with deliberate care, her face unreadable in the way soldiers' faces become when processing unbearable truths. 5 years, she said flatly. I've been married to a foreign agent for 5 years, loved him, trusted him, defended him to you. I wanted to offer comfort, to somehow mitigate this final devastating blow. But military experience had taught me that some wounds require acknowledgement, not platitudes. Yes, I said simply, and he used that trust to monitor me, to position Eagle's Talon for their ultimate operation, and to isolate you from anyone who might have helped you see the truth. She nodded once, a decisive motion that seemed to close some internal door. When she looked up again, her eyes had hardened into the same focused determination I'd seen in the best combat officers, those who could compartmentalize personal pain to complete the mission. I'll deal with Richard myself, she said, after we secure everyone else. The extraction operations proceeded with textbook precision. By 21:30 hours, we had all converged on Dr. Thompson's lake house 50 miles outside Bridgeport, a secluded property with natural defensive positions and multiple escape routes. Martha, James, Frank, Dr. Thompson, and 3 other trusted contacts I'd identified as potential targets were now secured in a single defensible location. The initial reunions were strained. Martha had been understandably shocked to find her supposedly dead ex-husband appearing at her workplace with urgent evacuation orders. James, though aware of my survival, hadn't anticipated the scope of the conspiracy we'd uncovered. The others ranged from confused to terrified as we explained the situation. "A coup?" Martha repeated, the nurse's practicality temporarily overwhelmed. "William, this sounds insane," James finished for her, "except for the evidence." Rebecca had arranged the proof methodically around the lake house's main room. Photographs, documents, financial records, and her own testimony about what she'd discovered in the storage facility. Collectively, it painted an undeniable picture of conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of government. "Tomorrow is the activation date for the Hampshire Protocol," I explained to the assembled group. "Eagle's Talon believes I might have survived Yemen and sees all of you as leverage to flush me out." "And Richard?" Martha asked, looking to Rebecca with maternal concern. "He's part of this?" Rebecca met her mother's gaze steadily. "Richard Bennett doesn't exist. He's a Russian intelligence officer named Alexei Vostov, placed specifically to monitor Dad through me." The revelation silenced the room. For Martha, who had welcomed Richard into our fractured family and treated him as the son-in-law who might finally bring stability to Rebecca's life, the betrayal extended beyond national security to the most personal violation. "I'm so sorry, sweet," she whispered, reaching for Rebecca's hand. Rebecca accepted the touch briefly before returning to operational mode, another trait she'd inherited from me. "We have approximately 12 hours before Eagle's Talon realizes their targets have disappeared. We need to contact federal authorities with our evidence before then." "Not just any authorities," James cautioned. "According to these documents, they have people throughout the standard chain of command. FBI, Homeland Security, even parts of the Justice Department are compromised. Which is why we're contacting the one person with both the authority and the independence to act," I said, retrieving a secure satellite phone from my equipment bag. "Director Catherine Chen, Naval Intelligence. She was my commanding officer in Afghanistan. More importantly, she's on Eagle's Talon's elimination list, which means they don't control her." The call to Director Chen was brief, encoded in operational language we'd established years ago for exactly this type of emergency. Within 30 minutes, a secure data transfer had conveyed our evidence to her private server, bypassing potentially compromised official channels. "Extraction team en route," I reported after ending the call. "ETA 3 hours. They'll transport us to a secure military facility while Chen initiates Operation Broken Talon, simultaneous arrests of all identified conspiracy members." Martha looked skeptical. "Can she do that without tipping them off? If they're as embedded as you say, she has a dedicated counterintelligence unit, Personnel specifically vetted for this type of internal threat. Each cell will move simultaneously, no advance warnings. I checked the satellite phone for confirmation signals. It's already in motion. As the others prepared for evacuation, Rebecca pulled me aside, her expression resolute. "I'm not going with the extraction team," she said quietly. "Rebecca, Richard still doesn't know I've discovered the truth," she continued, overriding my objection. "He thinks I'm grieving alone at a friend's house. I can use that." I recognized the tactical logic even as I rejected it as her father. "Absolutely not. He's a trained intelligence operative. If he suspects you know anything—" "I spent 5 years living with him," she countered. "I know his patterns, his tells, his vulnerabilities. And I'm the only one who can get close enough to secure the final piece we need." "What final piece?" "The activation codes for Operation Clean Slate." She produced a photograph from the storage facility, a document referencing secondary authorization protocols. "The assassination teams require final confirmation codes before proceeding. According to this, those codes are stored on Richard's personal server. I can access it." The military strategist in me acknowledged the critical intelligence value. The father in me recoiled at placing my daughter in direct contact with the man who had systematically deceived her for years. "It's too dangerous," I insisted. "Director Chen's teams will secure Richard along with the others. And if he has dead man switches, contingency plans? These people have planned for decades, Dad. They'll have fail-safes." Rebecca's determination matched my own. "This isn't just about national security anymore. It's personal. He used me to get to you, used our relationship, the pain your absences caused, to manipulate me for years." I recognized the need driving her. Not just tactical necessity, but the deeper human requirement for agency in the face of profound betrayal. I'd seen it in soldiers who'd lost comrades to enemy action. The need to respond, to act, to reclaim some measure of control when everything else had been taken. "You won't be going alone," I decided. "Frank and I will provide backup, full surveillance, immediate extraction capacity if anything seems wrong." The plan came together with military precision. Rebecca would return home, presenting herself as the grieving daughter still unaware of her husband's true identity. While Richard was distracted, she would access his secure server using the technical vulnerabilities we'd identified in our surveillance. As dawn broke over the lake house, the extraction team arrived to secure the others. Martha approached me before boarding their helicopter, her expression a complex mixture of emotions we'd never fully resolved. 45 years, she said quietly. 45 years of wondering if each mission would be the one you didn't come back from. And now here we are, in exactly the scenario I always feared. "I'm sorry, Martha," I offered inadequately. "For all of it," she shook her head. "We made our choices, William, both of us. But Rebecca," she glanced to where our daughter was reviewing operational details with Frank. "Bring her home. Whatever else happens, bring our daughter home." "I will," I promised. And for the first time in my military career, I knew with absolute certainty that I would fulfill this mission or die in the attempt. As the helicopter disappeared over the tree line with the others, Rebecca approached me, dressed in civilian clothes that would allow her to return home without arousing suspicion. "Ready?" I asked, searching her face for any hesitation. "I've been ready since I saw those files," she replied with quiet intensity. "He took 5 years of my life, Dad. Used me as a tool against my own father, against my country." She checked the concealed transmitter in her watch. Time to return the favor. 3 hours later, I watched through high-powered binoculars as Rebecca entered the home she'd shared with Richard. Frank monitored the audio feed from her concealed microphone, while I maintained visual surveillance from a neighboring property we'd secured as an observation post. "Remember, minimal engagement," I reminded her through the earpiece. "Access the server, retrieve the codes, then exit. No confrontation." "Copy that," came her calm response moments before she entered Richard's sightline. What followed was a masterclass in counterintelligence. Rebecca played her role perfectly, the grieving daughter seeking comfort from her supportive husband. Richard, believing his position secure, responded with the practiced sympathy that had fooled us all for years. "I've been so worried," he said, embracing her with seemingly genuine concern. "When you didn't come home last night, I needed space," Rebecca replied, her voice convincingly fragile. "Everything with Dad, it's overwhelming." Through the binoculars, I watched Richard's calculated expressions of sympathy, the precise modulation of concern that had made him such an effective deep-cover operative. Had I not known the truth, even I might have believed his performance. "Of course," he soothed, leading her to the sofa. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you." For 47 minutes, Rebecca maintained her cover, gradually steering the conversation toward work matters that would necessitate Richard checking his secure email, the access point we needed to his private server. "The Thompson estate case," she mentioned casually. "I know you were handling the offshore components. Did you ever file the final documentation?" Richard hesitated, professional instincts warring with his cover identity. "I submitted everything last week. The confirmation should be in my work email. Could you check? My partner needs confirmation today, and my phone died." She produced her deliberately powered-down device as evidence. The manipulation worked. Richard moved to his home office to access his secure systems, unwittingly providing Rebecca the opportunity we'd planned for. "Target is accessing primary system," Frank reported, monitoring the transmission from Rebecca's specialized watch. "Initiating server infiltration now." For 3 tense minutes, specialized software embedded in Rebecca's watch interfaced with Richard's system, bypassing security protocols and extracting the critical activation codes for Operation Clean Slate. "Data secured," came Rebecca's coded confirmation, "preparing for extraction." What happened next wasn't in our operational plan. Richard returned from his office earlier than anticipated, his expression subtly altered. To an untrained observer, nothing would have seemed amiss. But I recognized the shift immediately, the microscopic changes in posture and facial tension that signaled a covert operative moving to threat assessment mode. "Something wrong?" Rebecca asked with perfect innocence. Richard's smile remained in place, but his eyes had hardened to the cold calculation of his true identity. "Interesting," he said conversationally. "My security system just flagged an unauthorized access attempt. Sophisticated algorithm. Military grade." Rebecca maintained her cover flawlessly. "Hackers? Should we be worried?" "Oh, I don't think it's random hackers," Richard replied, moving with casual deliberation to block the main exit. "In fact, I'd say this particular intrusion has Colonel Harrington written all over it." I still remember the exact moment when Richard, or should I say Alexei, revealed his true self. The practiced mask of the loving husband fell away, replaced by the cold calculation of a trained operative who had spent 5 years living a lie. In that moment, standing in our living room with my daughter's life hanging in the balance, all my years of military training crystallized into a single imperative: protect Rebecca at all costs. What followed was a confrontation that would determine not just our survival, but potentially the future of our nation's leadership. Richard activated a hidden alarm system, summoning his Eagle's Talon associates, while simultaneously attempting to extract information about my survival and our knowledge of Operation Clean Slate. What he didn't realize was that we'd anticipated this contingency. Frank was already in position, and the moment Richard's true nature emerged, our extraction plan initiated. I won't detail the exact tactical maneuvers that followed. Operational security still matters, even now, but I will say that decades of special operations training proved more formidable than even Eagle's Talon had calculated. When Richard's backup arrived, they found not a vulnerable father-daughter pair, but a coordinated counterintelligence team with superior positioning and tactical advantage. The activation codes Rebecca had secured were transmitted to Director Chen's team, while we extracted under heavy fire. The evidence we'd gathered, combined with the operational details from the storage facility, provided everything needed for a comprehensive takedown of the Eagle's Talon network. Within hours, simultaneous raids were conducted across 12 states and 4 countries, neutralizing the leadership structure and preventing the assassination teams from receiving their final authorization. Operation Clean Slate, the planned decapitation strike against our government, never materialized. The election proceeded without incident. Democracy preserved not by grand political gestures, but by the quiet sacrifice of intelligence operatives whose names would never appear in history books. Richard Alexei Vostov was taken into custody by counterintelligence specialists, his true identity finally exposed after nearly a decade of deep cover operations on American soil. The interrogation revealed the full scope of foreign involvement in Eagle's Talon, connections that reached into several hostile intelligence services and exposed vulnerabilities throughout our national security infrastructure. For Rebecca, the aftermath brought a different kind of battle. The psychological impact of discovering your marriage was an intelligence operation, that every intimate moment had been calculated to extract information about your father. That's not something military training prepares you for. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound, challenging her understanding of her own judgment, her memories, her very identity. But if there's one thing my daughter inherited from me beyond tactical instinct, it's resilience. In the months that followed, as we rebuilt our lives under new identities, a necessary precaution given the international connections still targeting us, I watched Rebecca reclaim herself piece by piece. The attorney's analytical mind that had once made her a successful lawyer now turned toward counterintelligence work, transforming personal trauma into professional expertise that would help prevent others from suffering similar manipulation. Martha, my ex-wife, surprised me most of all. Despite the decades of separation caused by my military career, she stood with us throughout the recovery process, her nursing background providing invaluable support as Rebecca processed the psychological aftermath of long-term deception. The woman who had once left because my commitment to duty outweighed my commitment to family now demonstrated that some bonds transcend even the most painful separations. As for me, the old soldier who returned from war only to find a different kind of battle waiting at home, I finally understood what I'd missed during those 45 years of service. The medals on my chest, the commendations in my file, they recognized sacrifice for country, but they couldn't compensate for the moments lost with my daughter, the marriage that dissolved under the weight of constant absence, the family dinners and graduations, and simple Sunday mornings sacrificed to duty. Yet strangely, it was the Eagle's Talon conspiracy that ultimately gave me what 4 decades of military service couldn't, the chance to truly protect my daughter, not from some abstract foreign threat, but from an immediate danger that required my direct intervention. For the first time, my presence, rather than my absence, was what kept her safe. We live quietly now, in a small coastal town far from Bridgeport. Rebecca has built a new career using her legal background in ways that serve national security without requiring deep cover operations. Martha visits regularly, our shared concern for our daughter healing old wounds that once seemed permanent. And I've found a purpose beyond the uniform, mentoring young intelligence officers in counterintelligence techniques while emphasizing the human cost of the sacrifices we ask them to make. The inheritance I once threatened to take from Rebecca, it was never about money. The true inheritance I hope to leave her is the understanding that protection takes many forms, sometimes absence in service of a greater cause, sometimes presence in moments of direct need. Both require sacrifice. Both demonstrate love, however imperfectly expressed. This story isn't just about a military man's revenge against a manipulative son-in-law. It's about the complex balance between duty to country and duty to family, about recognizing when the mission and personal loyalty become one and the same, about finding redemption in the most unexpected circumstances. If you've stayed with me through this account, I ask you now to take action. Subscribe to the Revenge Expected channel, where stories like mine tales of justice delayed but not denied, of complex moral choices in impossible situations, find voice. Your subscription ensures these narratives continue to reach those who need to hear them, whether for entertainment, education, or the simple comfort of knowing others have faced similar challenges. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Each like helps more viewers discover these accounts, expanding our community of those who understand the true complexity behind seemingly simple acts of revenge. More importantly, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Would you have recognized the manipulation sooner? What would you have done in Rebecca's position? Discovering your marriage was built on deception. Your engagement helps us understand which aspects of these stories matter most to our viewers, guiding future content development. The production of these videos requires significant resources, location scouting, script development, technical equipment, and countless hours of editing to bring these stories to life with the quality you deserve. If you found value in this account, consider supporting the channel through gracias donations. Your financial contribution, however modest, directly funds our ability to produce daily content, exploring more cases where justice arrives in unexpected forms. The gracias button can be found below this video. Every contribution, regardless of amount, helps offset the substantial costs of producing professional quality content on a daily basis. Your support quite literally determines whether stories like mine continue to be told or fade into obscurity. For those who've experienced similar betrayals or who face impossible choices between duty and family, know that you're not alone. The Revenge Expected channel exists precisely to highlight these complex human dilemmas, offering not just entertainment, but perspective on the challenging moral territory we sometimes must navigate. As a final request, share this video with someone who might benefit from its message. Perhaps they're serving in the military, struggling with the balance between duty and family. Perhaps they're recovering from betrayal, seeking understanding of their experience. Your share could provide exactly the insight they need at a critical moment. This is Colonel William Harrington signing off, not as the decorated officer whose mission once consumed everything, but as a father who discovered that sometimes the most important operations aren't conducted on foreign soil, but across the dinner table, in the quiet conversations that rebuild trust, in the patient work of reclaiming relationships once thought lost forever. Remember, subscribe, like, comment, and support through gracias donations. Together, we ensure these stories continue to be told, these lessons continue to be shared, and these experiences continue to illuminate the complex territory between revenge and redemption.